16 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units. I have his sleeper options this week. The first one, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars here, I know they haven't been a good defense all season here, but this week here, it's a good sleeper option with a good matchup at the New York Jets that give up the 6th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So right here, I know it's been a bad season for both teams, but I actually like this ball game as being a low-scoring game where both defenses have a decent game this week. So the Jaguars available right now, 95% of fantasy leagues. So the last few weeks here for this defense over there in Jacksonville, Week 13 at the Rams, horrible ball game, 37 points allowed a sack. Week 14 at Tennessee, 20 points allowed, 4 sacks. And Week 15 versus the Texans, 30 points allowed, a sack and an into. So right here, the only reason I'm recommending them, they got a good matchup versus the Jets. Zach Wilson hasn't been good at all really here this season for this New York Jet team. And I think this Jacksonville team going into the stadium can make a few plays here on Zach Wilson, get a few turnovers. And like I mentioned, this ball game could be in the mid-teens to low 20s here. And I think Jacksonville, if you need a defense desperately, is a decent sleeper option. The next defense is the Detroit Lions. So the Lions, another piss-poor team this season here. But I'm going off matchup alone with a good matchup at the Atlanta Falcons that give up the 2nd most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So the Lions available in 99% of fantasy leagues. The last few games for them here, they've been serviceable, surprisingly. Week 13 versus Minnesota, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 14 at Denver, 38 points allowed, a sack. And then Week 15 for them, 12 points allowed, 2 sacks, and interception. So right here, last week versus Arizona, they won the ball game, surprisingly, which is probably one of the most shocking games of the season. And right here, the Atlanta Falcons, they don't move the football well. Right here, Matt Ryan limited with the amount of weapons he has. Russell Gage, Kyle Pitts here and there, and Patterson have been guys, but they've been inconsistent as well. So I think this defense could go in Atlanta and make a few plays this week here and be a serviceable option on defense as a sleeper option. And the third and final defense I have as a sleeper option is the Washington football team. So the football team, I know they got a tough matchup at Dallas, but let's be real here. This Dallas Cowboy offense, they haven't looked the same in many weeks here. They're barely putting up points, and their defense is putting them in better positions for the offense than the offense driving down the field and looking good over the last few weeks. So this Washington football team, they've been serviceable as well over the last few weeks, and they're available in 75% of fantasy leagues. Week 13 at the Raiders, 15 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 14 versus same Dallas offense in Washington, 21 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions, including a pick 6. And then last week at Philly in Week 15, a decent ball game, 27 points allowed, 3 sacks, an interception, and a fumble recovery. So right here on Sunday Night Football, where they got not a great opportunity to make the playoffs, still a division game, I still think they can make a few plays on Dak Prescott here, is this Washington football team. And this Cowboy offense, like I mentioned, they're not really doing well with moving the football. This Washington team had a good fantasy day versus them in Week 14, and I think they're a decent option this week as a sleeper option. So that's a few defense DST units. I have as sleeper options here for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.